What is up, guys? I'm gonna start out this week's Tom Talks with a quick informational rant. If I want to get better at fishing in 2017, I'm not going to a seminar, I'm not looking up a magazine article, I'm not reading a newspaper column. First thing I'm gonna do if I'm going to Hayward, Wisconsin next week walleye fishing, I'm gonna open up a little app called YouTube. I'm gonna type in Hayward walleye fishing. Immediately I have some great videos up here. Absolutely watch these videos, subscribe to this channel because this is just the beginning. My name is Tom Boley. Welcome back to the second installment of Tom Talks number 2. This is where I go on hopefully structured fishing rants, jam-packed full of information to teach you guys. Now the first order of business is I want you guys to somewhat control the content of what goes on these Tom Talks. I have a million ideas, but if you guys want to hear stuff, make sure to comment on the YouTube feed here. DM me on Instagram, message me on Facebook, shoot me an email, something. If you want to, if you want to learn something, if you want to hear me talk about open water trolling for muskies, if you want to hear me talk about, late fall jigging walleyes, if you want to hear me talk about spring crappie fishing, or, ice fishing's right around the corner here. If you want to hear me talk about, let's say how to find crappies in a big basin, things like that. I can talk for an extremely long time about anything related to fishing if it helps you guys out. So keep that in mind. I want you guys to control this content. Today we are talking about tip-up fishing. If you're from Wisconsin or really anywhere ice fishing, but especially Wisconsin because we have 3 lines, tip-ups are almost a tradition. I mean, they're huge in ice fishing. A lot of guys are kind of very vague, and I feel like they're incorporating more luck into how they're catching fish on tip-ups versus they're a huge strategical advantage when you're fishing, when doing it right. And we catch a lot of fish on tip-ups. We use tip-ups a lot of times to find hot bites, so they're just an absolutely huge tool. They're your second and third lines here in Wisconsin if you're jigging. So today we're gonna break this up into 3 different segments basically. First of all, what is a tip-up? How you rig a tip-up, stuff like that. The rigging is gonna kind of be like a part 2. The third part of this is gonna be where you place tip-ups, how you effectively fish with tip-ups to catch more fish. So we're gonna dig right into the first thing we're gonna talk about today. What is a tip-up? How do you rig a tip-up? Stuff like that. So very basically, I have 2 favorite tip-ups. My absolute favorite one is a Beaver Dam tip-up. These things have been around forever and ever and ever. What makes them good is, they are a little pricier, is just the quality of the spool. They're a very smooth spool, and obviously that's just a great asset. The second favorite one is a little bit cheaper option. This is a Frabill, I believe it's called an Arctic Fire tip-up. Yeah, it is what it's called. And I've actually had really good luck with these 2. Very smooth spool. These ones are only about 14, 15 bucks versus the Beaver Dam, which is like 38 or $40. So these are my 2 favorites. I use as many Beaver Dams. Most of the time I'm using Beaver Dam tip-ups just because I like them more. However, tip-ups are fairly interchangeable. So with that being said, we're gonna dig right into. We're gonna talk about the rigging here. Line-wise, I'll use a bunch of different kinds of line. I don't think line is really extremely crucial. The one thing, even I've done before is I've used like 100-pound musky braid on my, on my tip-ups before without any issues. So the actual main line you're using is not that important. The biggest piece of this puzzle is the business end of it. And that's gonna vary depending on what you are fishing for. So I'll fish tip-ups primarily for northerns, walleyes, perch. In my area, those are kind of the 3 things that I really use tip-ups a lot for. When I'm fishing walleyes, we're gonna start with walleyes here. It really depends on, number 1, how clear the water is, what line weight I'm using. That would probably be the biggest one. The second would be how big of a bait am I using, because the bigger the bait I'm using, I'm gonna have to set the hook harder to get hooks into that fish. So most of the time when I am walleye fishing, just to make it simple for you guys, I am using anywhere between 6-pound fluorocarbon and let's say 12-pound fluorocarbon on my tip-ups. I have seen that line weight make a difference. I'll generally get away with the lightest line possible for obvious reasons, but when I'm walleye fishing with a tip-up, typically I'm fishing clear water up here this time of year. If I'm not fishing as clear water, I can shorten down on my lead, but I'm gonna run a 6, 7, 8 foot fluorocarbon lead of that 6 to 12 pound fluorocarbon. I just like that just because you can imagine your bait is very stationary, obviously, with ice fishing. And if you got that big bull rope going all the way down, and then you got 1 foot to that 6 pound, you know, that fish can obviously see that you know, thicker line weight up top. So I'll run a real long lead typically. I will connect my lead to the main line in an interesting way. You can see there, hopefully the camera focuses a little bit. But basically what I have here is I have a snap swivel down to a swivel down to my lead. This does a couple things for me. You know, obviously it's good to have a swivel because that minnow's constantly going around, so I'm not getting my leader all tangled up. But it makes changing leads very easy. So you can see here, you know, I got my 2 leads pieced together right there. All I'm gonna do to change this out, you know, let's say I'm fishing 6 pound test, or let's say I have a pike rig on this one, and I start catching walleyes either jigging or on my other tip ups, and I want to change out. Very simple to open up that snap, take this leader off, and put on a pre-tied walleye leader that I would have on. Very simple approach. You know, ice fishing's all about making life easier. If things are hard to do, you know, if it's a long process to change out, your hands are cold, you know, it's just, you're less apt to make the correct changes to catch more fish. So that's one thing I do that really makes life a lot easier. The other thing I do with mine that I see some guys doing, but not a lot of guys doing, you know, when you're setting your tip up, a lot of guys will use, you know, small bobbers to mark how deep their tip ups are. I don't like this. I don't really know why. I think it just adds bulk, and I don't really like that much. So what I'll actually do is I'll tie in like an open water bobber stop onto my line, and I'll set my depth that way. So I know exactly, you know, after I catch a fish, I know exactly how deep my bait was. So that's the other thing I do. Rigging, you know, hooks weight-wise, obviously you have a million different options here. Typically, once again, I'll go with as light as possible. One thing I do that I don't see a lot of guys doing is I will run my split shot when walleye fishing or perch fishing. I'll run my split shot very close to my hook. Even in the late winter, sometimes when these fish get real lethargic, I'll have it like 3 inches above my minnow. Now you can imagine if you got your split shot, you know, a foot, let's say 2 feet above that minnow. A fish swims up to it, my minnow can essentially go 2 feet higher than I want my bait to be. And when these fish are real lethargic, real late in the winter, it's good to almost pin them right exactly where you want them. So that's another thing that will absolutely get you more bites, especially late in the winter. Northern pike, it's less important because these fish are more apt to move up and down throughout the water column. You know, weight-wise, I have no problem with split shots. Pike, I might use some bullet weights, but that's basically how I'm running my weight. Hook-wise, I do absolutely have a favorite hook when I am walleye and perch fishing, and these are thin wire. I'm not really sure what the model is, but they're a number 10 mustad hook. You know, very fine wire, very easy to hook fish this way. You know, especially if I'm running a really light line. Obviously, if I got 6 pound test on, I can't just smash into a fish. So these allow you to kind of do that real soft hook set, and you know, still there's extremely sticky hooks. They're gonna catch a lot of fish for you. If I am running a bigger minnow, basically I'll just upsize that thin wire hook. I really like wire hooks if I'm walleye fishing, just because most of the time I'm not setting the hook extremely hard, and the thinner diameter that hook is, the less you know, amount of pressure it's going to take to penetrate with that hook. So going back real quick to the versatility of a tip up and being able to change on the go and stuff like that. I will pre-tie up all my leads that I want to use, you know, whether it's, you know, if I'm fishing perch or walleyes, it's generally a 6 to 12 pound. You know, small hook, I'll kind of vary the size of my hooks depending on how big of the baits I'm using. You know, if I have a bunch of tip ups out and, you know, I have some small, like let's say rosy reds or fatheads on my tip ups, and these ones are getting all the bites, and I have, you know, some bigger walleye or northern suckers on some tip ups, those ones just aren't getting bit. You know, what I'll go back through and actually do on my tip ups that aren't catching fish, I use these, you know, this is how I pre-tie all my leads. I just put them around a tube inside there. These are actually tubes from 14-inch jigs, musky trolling lures. But I'll pull out these tubes of my pre-tied leads, and you know, let's say I want to upsize a bait. So I'll take out this lead, I'll pull it off of here, and I'll pull off my smaller lead. All you do is unhook that snap there, all you do is unhook the snap, take the swivel from my other bigger rig, slide it on there, and I'm good to go. No retying a whole bunch of parts, very quick, very easy to change. You know, now you can see I got this bigger rig with the bigger hook on there. Most of the time when I'm walleye fishing, I am running single hook rigs. A lot of times earlier in the year, I'll run some really bigger, you know, a lot larger minnows like a northern sucker or a big chub. And then I might go to a kind of a 2-hook rig. When I'm pike fishing, I'm always running a 2-hook rig. And a lot of times early season, this is actually the same rig I'll use for walleye fishing. But basically what this is 50-pound fluorocarbon. This is very similar to what Clam makes called the Zero Rig. It's just a lot cheaper obviously to make your own. 50-pound fluorocarbon here. You can go up from that. If you're fishing for real big pike, I would upsize to like a 80-pound fluorocarbon. Basically all that is a knot to knot, and then I have essentially just a loop in my fishing line, and 2, I believe these are number 6 treble hooks on here. 1 hook on one side and around the head, 1 hook closer to the tail on the other side of the minnow, and you're good to go. So one thing we always strive for is ice fishing, especially in clear water, is to be essentially as finesse as possible. These fish's metabolisms are extremely low. They don't have to eat a lot in the winter time, and you know, it's a lot easier to make a mistake and not catch a fish because these fish don't have to, you know, actively be feeding 100% of the time. So with that being said, you know, especially in clear water, I'm trying to run extremely light, extremely finessed rigs. And, you know, a lot of times when we're walleye fishing early in the season around weeds or, you know, other structures that have a lot of bait, we do run into a lot of pike and you get broke off. And obviously it's no fun retying stuff in the cold. One tip I've shown before on Facebook, but I'll show it again right now. I'm going to take one of my tip-ups here that I have rigged up with 6-pound. I'm just cutting the hook off. You know, let's say I'm catching a few walleyes, but there's just a lot of pike around. I'm getting bit off quite frequently. So I'm going to take, this is a strand of 60-pound fluorocarbon tied to a treble hook. This treble hook's too big, but I'm just using it to illustrate a point here. And essentially what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my line here and I'm going to tie a uni knot with the 6-pound test around my bulky, heavy 60-pound fluorocarbon here. If you don't know how to tie a uni knot, look it up, pretty simple. Once you have the uni knot tied, you're gonna cinch it right down to the knot of your hook. So now what I have here, I have some 6-pound test uni knotted in, just freely sliding on this 60-pound fluorocarbon. I'm gonna take, and what I'm actually gonna do is cut this fluorocarbon about 2 inches above the hook, wherever my knife is. Nice clean cut there. So if I were to pull on this 6-pound, it would just slide right off the end of here because I have not uni knotted that bulkier 60-pound. I'm gonna take and cut the tag of this 6-pound. You can see that there. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a lighter and I'm going to actually burn the end of this 60-pound fluorocarbon. When you burn line, it kind of, especially bulky line, it'll kind of bulk up, turn into a kind of a waxy ball almost. Cool that off quick. Now I'm going to take, hopefully this camera focuses right. I'm going to take and I'm going to pull the tag down to this bulky end of the fluorocarbon. Now what I have is basically 2 inches of 60-pound fluorocarbon, real tough stuff to break, almost seamlessly seamed in to 6-pound test. This gives me the finesse that I need to still catch walleyes, yet you know, a little bit more, actually a lot more resistance from getting bit off. I always get questions on how strong this stuff is. I have never had a failure. The biggest thing you just got to make sure is that fluorocarbon balls up real tight when you burn it, or kind of gets that real you know, bulky ball. But other than that, I've been using this for a long time and it saves a lot of frustration. You catch a lot more pike doing it and the walleyes don't mind it either. All right, now we're gonna get into the fun stuff here. You can be the best technically rigged tip-up fisherman of all time, but if you're not around fish or setting your tip-ups properly, you're not gonna catch as many fish at all. So with that being said, I use tip-ups a couple of different ways. Most of the time I use them to almost scout a bite in front of me. You know, we're allowed 3 lines here in Wisconsin. You know, if you're applying 2 lines, just kind of accommodate it to what you're doing. But, you know, I'll look at a spot. Let's say I'm gonna roll up onto this spot and walleye fish. I am gonna look for high percentage areas where I want my tip-ups to be. Let's say I pull into a big weedy bay here, like this one. You can see I'm gonna set my tip-ups up on these high percentage points. I love points and I love inside turns. Points kind of get the nod for me the majority of the time. Obviously, you know, it really all comes down to structure. You want to be around very unique characteristics in the bottom because these presentations are not moving. You know, you're not covering water. All you're doing is letting a bait basically soak. I want these tip-ups in spots where I know fish are gonna pull into. And you know, a lot of times here that's points. Let's say this bay is a big weedy bay. You know, you can see my 3 circles on the map here. I know these are unique characteristics within this bay, and if they have good weeds on them, those are going to be excellent spots to set your tip-ups up. Now, I am allowed a jig rod, obviously. I have 3 lines, so if I have 2 tip-ups out on one tip-up on a point, 1 tip-up on another point, I might start out jigging on another point, or I might, you know, just drill a bunch of holes, which is what I normally do, and move through them jigging. Now, if I'm catching a few walleyes, let's say on one spot, I am absolutely going to move my tip-ups into that area. You know, I don't just want to disregard, you know, what's happening, you know, with that one and say, oh, you know, maybe they'll come over there. I am constantly moving my tip-ups around. Now, typically what I do when I drill holes and I set up on a spot is I'll drill a lot of holes, even if it's somewhere where, you know, I don't have a lot of interest in fishing. You know, I'll obviously drill my main holes that I'm going to be placing my tip-ups or my set lines on a point here, and a point here, but I'll also drill a flurry of holes between those spots, maybe shallower, maybe deeper, maybe between the lines, stuff like that. And this allows me to, you know, essentially leapfrog tip-ups from one location to the other, you know, very quickly without, you know, causing a whole bunch of ruckus on top of the ice. Very rarely will I ever have a day, you know, fishing, whether it's for pike, perch, or walleyes through the ice, where I'm not moving my tip-ups numerous times throughout the day or throughout the afternoon or throughout, you know, the 1 hour right around dark. I fish tip-ups very actively, almost like a jigging presentation, you know, where if I let something sit and I know there's fish in other areas and that one doesn't go off, I'm absolutely moving it to somewhere where I feel I have a better probability of catching a fish. Now, one of the most overlooked parts of, you know, being a good set line or tip-up fisherman is how you're setting a tip-up. Now, this might sound super dumb and, you know, well, you got to be around fish, so that's where I'm going to set up, and, you know, you might not put a lot of emphasis on being A, the correct height off the bottom, B, looking for microstructures around that spot. So you can have a big long point extension. It's got great weed growth on it, and you know, a lot of times guys don't take the time to set up very precisely where they want to be. You got to remember, this is the middle of winter. Water temps are obviously frigid. These fish aren't swimming in extremely long ways to go bite a bait that's sitting still. So what I try to do most of the time, I'll drill let's say I'm fishing a big weed point. You know, it's got great weeds in 12 feet, kind of your edges in like 15 feet. You get some sporadic stuff in 15. I'm not going to drill a straight line of holes. I'm not going to drill 3 holes, set my tip-ups up in those 3 holes. I'm going to drill a bunch of holes, and what I'll actually do is go around my flasher, check each hole for weeds. And you know, what I don't want to do, and you'll rarely see this whether it's summer, winter, any time of year, is a very extremely thick ball of, let's say, cabbage. You know, a very thick cabbage pocket in 15 feet of water, and the walleye is just nestled unbelievably tight within inside of it. Most of the time these fish are associated with that very thick weeds, but they're not essentially right in the middle of the ball. It's also very hard to fish a set line in a huge ball of weeds. So what I'll do most of the time, if I'm marking a big ball of weeds in my flasher, I'll drill holes kind of strategically foot by foot by foot until I'm right on that edge. I've got some flickering weeds that are maybe a foot tall on my flasher, and I'll set there. Now the biggest mistake a lot of guys do, and I see it all the time when guys set their tip ups with depth bobs, which isn't really a problem, but you know, they'll drop their depth bob to the bottom, it'll hit bottom, they'll pull it up just a couple inches, and that's where they set their tip up. When I'm fishing weeds, a lot of times I'm setting my bait, especially early ice season, I'm setting my bait very high. I'm gonna set, you know, if I'm fishing 15 feet of water, I've got weeds that come up a foot. You gotta remember, I'm also next to this big ball of weeds, so I don't want it essentially nestled down in the crease. I want this bait 3-4 feet off bottom, kind of above this weed line. Give those fish a nice easy target, something to see, and that one of the biggest pet peeves I see when I watch guys set tip ups is they set too close to the bottom. And these fish, I absolutely have more success catching fish multiple feet off the bottom as I do, you know, right on the bottom, just, you know, barely off the weed edge or barely off the rock, stuff like that. Well, that got kind of long, but thank you guys for watching. If you guys have not already, absolutely subscribe to this channel, watch any number of these 3 videos, and stay tuned for more.